How many have you indicted?
Excuse me, I'm going to answer the question.
Answer my question.
No, I'm going to answer the question the way I want to answer the question.
No,
Your
you're going to answer the
theatrics are
question the
ridiculous.
way I asked it.
Chairman Jordan, I'm not going to get in the gutter with these people, but I'm going to answer the question.
How many have you indicted?
The hearing then descended into open confrontation. A lawmaker pressed the Attorney General with a direct question: how many of Epstein's co-conspirators have you indicted? How many are you even investigating? What followed was not a simple exchange of question and answer, but a chaotic back and forth over who controlled the time, who was interrupting whom, and whether the witness was being allowed to respond. The chairman repeatedly reminded members that the witness has the right to answer. Critics fired back that the response was turning into a filibuster. Voices overlapped. Requests to restore the time echoed across the chamber. The tension was unmistakable. When pressed again on the number of indictments, the answer given by critics was blunt: 0. The Attorney General rejected the framing entirely, pivoting instead to accusations that the hearing itself was politically motivated. She argued that prior administrations were not questioned with the same intensity and defended the current administration's transparency, pointing to the release of millions of pages of documents related to the Epstein investigation. At one point, the discussion veered sharply into broader political territory: economic performance, stock market records, and accusations of partisan double standards. Lawmakers objected, asking what economic indicators had to do with the specific question of criminal accountability. The chairman struggled to maintain order as interruptions continued. The confrontation escalated again when a member attempted to narrow the focus with a yes or no question: whether certain emails constituted credible evidence warranting further investigation. The Attorney General declined to engage in what she described as a yes or no game, reiterating instead that any credible allegation involving victims would be reviewed. But time ran short. The member noted that much of his questioning period had been consumed by extended responses and procedural disputes. The central question, how many co-conspirators had been indicted, remained a flashpoint. By the end of the exchange, the room was visibly divided. What began as a focused inquiry into accountability had transformed into a broader clash over transparency, political motives, and the role of oversight itself. The episode underscored not only the sensitivity of the Epstein case, but also the deep partisan rift over how justice investigations are handled and how answers are delivered when the stakes are this high. The atmosphere in the chamber never fully recovered. As members continued to spar, it became clear that the dispute was no longer just about a single investigation. It had evolved into a struggle over narrative control: who gets to define transparency, who gets to frame accountability, and who ultimately answers to the public. Some lawmakers argued that refusing a direct numerical answer only deepened suspicion. In their view, when a simple question cannot receive a simple response, the public naturally wonders why. Others countered that complex investigations cannot be reduced to sound bites, especially in cases involving thousands of documents, ongoing reviews, and sensitive victim information. The exchange also exposed a recurring tension in congressional hearings: the balance between aggressive oversight and procedural fairness. Members insisted on reclaiming their time. The chair insisted on protecting the witness's right to answer. Each interruption became symbolic of a larger institutional friction: oversight versus control, inquiry versus defense. Outside the chamber, reactions were swift. Supporters of the questioning lawmakers praised the effort to demand clarity on Epstein's network and any remaining uncharged associates. They argued that persistent pressure is necessary when dealing with powerful individuals and unresolved questions. Meanwhile, defenders of the Attorney General said the hearing illustrated how easily legitimate oversight can turn into political theater. Yet beneath the noise, one issue remained unresolved: accountability for those connected to Epstein's crimes. Survivors and advocates continue to seek answers about whether every credible lead has been pursued. The debate in Congress reflected that ongoing demand for transparency, even if the hearing itself produced more confrontation than clarity. In the end, the clash underscored something deeper about the current political moment. Trust in institutions is fragile. Every high-profile exchange becomes a test, not just of policy, but of credibility. And when answers appear incomplete or evasive, even if legally constrained, the vacuum is quickly filled with suspicion. Whether this hearing leads to new investigations, additional disclosures, or simply more partisan sparring remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. The Epstein case continues to cast a long shadow over Washington, and the questions surrounding it are not going away anytime soon. In the aftermath, lawmakers signaled that the issue would not be allowed to fade quietly. Some hinted at formal requests for additional briefings, while others suggested subpoenas could be considered if clearer answers were not provided voluntarily. The message was unmistakable. This line of inquiry is far from over. Legal analysts noted that high-profile investigations often unfold in stages, with public disclosures lagging behind internal developments. Still, they acknowledged that when a case carries the weight and notoriety of Epstein's crimes, expectations for transparency are significantly higher. The public wants reassurance that every credible lead has been pursued, and that no individual, regardless of status or influence, is shielded from scrutiny. At the same time, the department faces institutional constraints. Prosecutors are bound by evidentiary standards, grand jury secrecy rules, and ethical obligations that limit what can be discussed publicly. Supporters argue that these constraints protect the integrity of the process. Critics respond that repeated references to procedural limitations can sound like avoidance when the central questions remain unanswered. The political ripple effects may extend beyond this single hearing. Oversight battles often shape future legislation, funding decisions, and internal reforms. If momentum builds, Congress could push for clearer reporting requirements in cases involving high-profile defendants or co-conspirators. Whether such efforts gain bipartisan traction will depend on how the broader debate evolves. For now, what lingers is the unresolved tension between demand and defense, demand for numbers, for indictments, for clear accountability, and defense rooted in process, procedure, and institutional caution. That tension reflects a larger struggle over how justice is communicated in an age of intense polarization and instant public reaction. As attention shifts to the next phase of scrutiny, one reality remains. The questions raised in that chamber about co-conspirators, investigations, and transparency will continue to echo. And until definitive answers emerge, the debate over accountability in one of the most notorious criminal cases in recent history is likely to remain firmly in the national spotlight. As the debate stretches on, the broader political consequences are becoming harder to ignore. For some lawmakers, this hearing was about drawing a clear contrast, presenting themselves as champions of transparency and accountability. For others, it was about defending institutional integrity against what they see as performative outrage designed for headlines. But beyond strategy and optics lies a deeper institutional challenge. When congressional oversight turns into procedural warfare, arguments over time limits, interruptions, and accusations of filibustering, the public focus shifts away from substance. Instead of clarity on investigations, viewers are left with spectacle, and spectacle rarely restores trust. For victims and survivors connected to Epstein's crimes, the noise in Washington can feel distant from their lived reality. What they seek is not partisan victory, but resolution. Confirmation that every responsible party has been pursued with equal determination. Each heated exchange in Congress inevitably circles back to that unmet expectation. The hearing also raises a difficult question about modern governance. How can institutions communicate complex legal realities in a climate that demands immediate, definitive answers? Prosecutors operate on evidence, timelines, and legal thresholds. Political forums operate on urgency, public pressure, and sound bites. When those worlds collide, friction is almost guaranteed. Looking ahead, much will depend on follow-through. If further disclosures, updates, or investigative actions materialize, critics may soften their claims of inaction. If not, the narrative of evasion may harden. In today's media environment, perception can quickly solidify into political reality. Ultimately, this episode is about more than one hearing and more than one official. It reflects an era in which trust must be actively earned and constantly defended. Oversight is sharper, skepticism is deeper, and the expectation that powerful institutions must answer clearly and directly has never been stronger. Whether that expectation will be met and how remains one of the defining questions moving forward. In many ways, this moment captures a larger crossroads for federal institutions. The public appetite for accountability is stronger than ever, especially in cases tied to powerful individuals and long-running investigations. Lawmakers know that every unanswered question carries political weight, and every incomplete response risks fueling further doubt. As more hearings are scheduled and additional documents are reviewed, both sides will likely continue refining their message. Critics will keep pressing for concrete numbers, clear timelines, and visible action. Supporters of the department will continue emphasizing due process, evidentiary standards, and the dangers of rushing politically sensitive investigations for the sake of optics. But beyond strategy, there is a fundamental institutional test underway. Can the justice system demonstrate independence while under intense political scrutiny? Can it provide enough transparency to reassure the public without compromising legal integrity? Those questions now sit at the center of the national conversation. The Epstein case, because of its notoriety and the powerful figures long rumored to be connected to it, amplifies every concern. It has become symbolic, not just of criminal wrongdoing, but of the fear that influence and status can distort accountability. That symbolism ensures that congressional confrontations like this one will continue drawing attention. For now, the story remains unfinished. Investigations evolve, oversight continues, and political narratives compete for dominance. What ultimately matters is whether the process leads to credible outcomes that withstand scrutiny from both supporters and critics alike. Until then, the central demand echoing from that hearing chamber will persist. Equal justice under the law, clear answers, and accountability that reaches as far as the evidence allows. No further, but certainly no less. And as the dust settles from this latest confrontation, the broader implications continue to unfold. Each exchange like this becomes part of a cumulative record, a public ledger of what was asked, what was answered, and what remained unresolved. Over time, that record shapes how institutions are judged. For members of Congress, the pressure to maintain momentum is real. Oversight does not end with a single hearing. It requires sustained follow-up, documented requests, and measurable benchmarks. Without that persistence, even the most forceful questioning risks fading into political memory without tangible results. For the Department of Justice, the challenge is equally significant. Silence can be interpreted as caution or as concealment. Detailed explanations can be seen as transparency or as deflection. Navigating that perception gap demands careful communication, especially in cases that already carry public suspicion. The media landscape further intensifies the dynamic. Short clips of heated exchanges circulate widely, often detached from the broader legal context. That amplification can harden public opinion quickly, making it even more difficult for institutions to rebuild trust once doubt takes hold. Yet despite the confrontation and partisan friction, one enduring principle remains central to the debate. The rule of law must operate independently of political pressure. If oversight becomes purely performative, it weakens institutions. If institutions become insulated from scrutiny, it weakens democracy. The balance between those forces is delicate and constantly tested. As this chapter continues, the key question is not simply who won the exchange in the hearing room, it is whether the process moving forward delivers clarity, fairness, and demonstrable accountability, because in the long run, public trust is shaped less by rhetoric and more by results. And ultimately, that may be the defining takeaway from this entire episode. Heated exchanges, procedural clashes, and partisan accusations may dominate the headlines in the short term. But over time, what endures is whether meaningful action followed the words. Were additional investigations opened? Were credible leads fully pursued? Were decisions explained clearly enough to withstand bipartisan scrutiny?